We've got this, topic that we are all hearing a lot about, reading a lot about, hearing a lot of noise about, a lot of buzz. I'm sure a lot of people have spent time puzzling over this, seeking through the Wikipedia articles and, going down the rabbit hole on blockchain and Bitcoin and ICOs and crypto and all that stuff the last couple of years. And so we'll try to demystify as much of that as possible and give you a couple takeaways that are actually concrete and tangible. But if first everyone just really quickly, we'll go through 1, 2, 3, 4, just introduce exactly the angle that you're coming at this problem from, and then we'll just go through and go on from there. So Marie?
Hi, Marie from IBM, and focused on blockchain for enterprise as well as blockchain for good. So interesting corollaries to some of the other discussions.
Hi, Frank Yiannas with Walmart, where I oversee food safety and other public health functions. Very interested in blockchain applications as it relates to food safety, food traceability, and developing a more transparent food system for customers.
Hi, my name is Yamamoto from United Nations. We're looking at blockchain, how to improve our operations, humanitarian development, peacekeeping operations. There are lots of things to do.
Hi everyone, I'm Chrissa McFarlane, the founder and CEO of Patientory, and we empower consumers to take control of their health data, and as well as improve care coordination using blockchain technology.
So one of the things we're always kind of asking about is what are some real applications that blockchain is in right now, and I was wondering, Chris, if you could explain a little bit how you guys actually use blockchain in patient data, and sort of if this is something we can expect to see soon, or if we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is a lot of work being done, especially in as we look to federal and government agencies that want to secure health data information. I know one of the biggest issues that has grown in the past year has been data breaches across healthcare and hospital organizations, which can cost up to over $700,000. So Patientory uses blockchain. Through our association, we have a private permission consortium network that actually encrypts data that's tied to EMR. So the Meditex, the Cerner's, the Epic, and secures it and makes it available to.
Are you like actually doing it right now? Like real patient data is in the system as we speak?
Yeah, for our test cases, we have patient data that's more small size use cases.
So yeah, so there's I guess for a lot of those sort of test pilot programs right now. Another one, obviously, that I know your companies have both been talking a lot about is what Walmart and IBM are doing together. Maybe if one of you could quickly explain where that's at right now.
Sure, I'll start with it. First of all, let me begin with this idea, and it's very sincere, that Walmart is not chasing blockchain technology. We're going to be talking about the technology, but what we're really trying to do is solve challenges in the food system. You think about today's food system, over 50,000 SKUs in a grocery store. It's a pretty magnificent food system. You can come in, a retail establishment and buy foods for a fraction of your hard-earned dollar. But there are some challenges, and the biggest challenge in the food system, from my vantage point, is that there's a lack of transparency. It's an Achilles heel. How many of you have heard about the romaine outbreak that occurred in the United States with romaine salad from Yuma? Health officials came out and said, Americans do not eat romaine salad if it's from Yuma, Arizona. How many of you knew whether your salad or romaine lettuce came from Yuma? You didn't. And that's because there's a lack of traceability. By regulation, we're only required for one step up, one step back on paper. And so it's almost impossible to have a long view. So working with IBM over a year ago, we set out to say, is blockchain technology a suitable technology for food traceability? And we did a pilot with small suppliers that grow mangoes. We tried to track how small mangoes get from farmer to packing house, across the customs border, get eventually sliced and packaged in the United States and shipped to our stores. And how long do you think it took us to trace those mangoes back to source? 6 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes. Working with the blockchain platform developed by IBM, our suppliers and their suppliers, we did a proof of concept, scanned a package of mangoes, it can trace back those mangoes to source with specificity and precision in 2.2 seconds. That's what we're talking about, traceability and transparency at the speed of light. And so the system, if it becomes more transparent, will be a smarter and safer food system.
So, I mean, I've seen a lot of examples of pilot programs of physical assets being tracked using blockchain, but my understanding of blockchain is that it's sort of this digital thing where you can very easily, with a lot of, without needing a third party to certify it, everyone who's doing the transaction digitally can trust that what's on there is true, no one's tampered with it. But why can't I just like switch out the box of mangoes for another box of mangoes and stick the same barcode on it? I mean,
great question,
Maria. That's kind of what you guys are working on, right?
And we see it not just for financial transactions, as was mentioned, but traceability and trust in all manner of goods, as long as they can be digitally represented. And in many of those cases, the information is hashed, and you can then trace and look throughout the supply chain and see, has it been tampered with, because you can compare the hash values. There is still no substitute for garbage in, garbage out of if the RFID tag or the label or the GS1 code that we're using in the case of Food Trust is wrong at the source, and you put that on a package of lettuce instead of mangoes, that's still going to be a problem. But you will know if somebody took an extra pallet off the back of a truck, and the match of how many are here versus how many got it to the other end are there. You will know if there have been other changes. And because it's still a human and digital interaction, there are people and verifiers, both on the blockchain as well as in the supply chain, that tend to root those out very quickly. Because everybody sees a common view of the data, they quickly can tell, and we've had this happen, this data doesn't look right. I placed a different order. When you're all validating and having consensus on that, at the time of the transaction, you tend to see these things much more quickly than when it gets all the way to the end of a supply chain, and you have to try to unravel that.
That's a great answer. Can I build a little bit? Because that's a common question, which is, okay, so what? You convert from a traditional system to blockchain. People can falsify or cheat the blockchain system. Yeah. And in food in particular, how many of you remember the horse meat scandal in the UK and Europe a few years ago? People were going to grocery stores buying a product that they thought was 100%, let's say, beef lasagna, and there was no beef in it all. It was horse meat. How do you think that happened? There were unscrupulous actors in the supply chain that know they can get away with those substitutions and never get caught. And even when the investigators try to chase that down, that paper trail is messy, and sometimes you never identify it. So just the mere notion that you take what's recorded today on paper and you put it in a blockchain, you have some validation through consensus, but if somebody cheats, they have to be a pretty dumb fraudster, because now you have a digital footprint right back to their door. And then in time, as you develop the Internet of Things and capture more data via sensors, that type of fraudulent activity will be further deterred. But I'm convinced that if you just take what's happening today and put it on blockchain, you deter a lot of fraudulent activity.
Yoshi, I'm curious what the discussions in your office about this technology are. I mean, what applications are you working on right now of blockchain at the UN?
Well, as he said, we're not chasing for technology itself. We have an issue, we have a question to solve. So for that question, how much blockchain could be useful or any other technology? So that's the approach. We're not trying to find something definitely use blockchain. And having said that, we're dealing with humans, not something digital. We have to deal with human always in many different situations. So there is the interface between the real world and digital world. So that's a very big question. How to solve it, how to connect that. As you said, on the data layer, there are many things can be done these days, which improved on the blockchain. But how we get all this realistic problem we are facing into these data layers, that's a huge challenge at the moment. So we are very much realistic about that.
So is it sort of in like investigating, human rights abuses or claims? I mean, being able to put data in some kind of database that everyone can trust, because there's obviously a lot of shenanigans going on around the world with people saying, claiming other countries did things when really they didn't. Is that one of the applications potentially?
Yes, so the data entry is a huge issue. Once data is entered into the blockchain, it's very difficult to change it anymore. So the entry point is a big question. But we talk about 2 billion unbanked people. It would be good to put all these people in the data, but how we put it? If it takes 10 minutes for each person, 10 billion, 20 billion minutes is a workload. How we can do it very effectively, That kind of question we're trying to address.
Right. Chrissa, on the EMR, electric medical records, I mean, my understanding of a big problem is not necessarily just technological. It's that different states and different hospital groups and outside of America, different jurisdictions trying to centralize their patient records can't agree. There's different privacy concerns. I mean, is technology really the problem here, or can technology help some of those other more maybe social or regulatory issues?
Yeah, and one of the things with blockchain is it's consortium based, as I mentioned earlier. So it's really getting everyone incentivized and at the table, which doesn't exist today. Here in the U.S., one of the biggest issues we have is interoperability, which has been a problem for the past over 15 years since the introduction of the EMR. So we definitely see blockchain as a starting point to really lay the groundwork and the foundation for a lot of the incentivization to happen. I
mean, like, what discussions with government have you had about this stuff? What are they saying when you bring it up? Are they kind of skeptical, or are they on board?
I mean, we see governments around the world who has taken a more aggressive initiative. We have countries like Dubai who actually put in a blockchain smart city initiative by 2020. And we definitely see here in the U.S., HHS call for blockchain white papers, and RFPs that are starting to come out. While it's still very early stages, we definitely see, governments having a role in the overall adoption of the technology.
And it is very much a case where it is less the technology that is an issue in a consensus-based approach, and much more of a governance issue. How do you ensure privacy of information? How do you get collaboration on that across the key stakeholders to put all of their data on a blockchain? So that balance between transparency and privacy and confidentiality is extending both to the individual and to the organizations that are participating. And there's a lot of change coming, I believe, in terms of legislation to support that, with a whole range of different topics. Just recently, we worked with a startup, Humanity.co, that is focused on extending the right to your personal data and leverage existing personal privacy legislation as a mandate. They're starting in healthcare saying, you are the one that should have the right and permissioning of how your data is used beyond regulatory requirements for things like population health. Do you want it to be shared with a nonprofit for research? Do you want it to be used? And if you are allowing its use, is there any compensation that comes from that? Eliminating some of the robo and non-human based actors in the system as well.
I mean, it sort of gets into an interesting thing, and it's not necessarily just a blockchain thing, but sort of personal data ownership, data portability. I write a lot about Facebook and Google and how they use data to fund their business models, and people now beginning more and more to talk about regulation requiring them to let people take all their data and their social graph and move somewhere else. I mean, but in healthcare records, it's an obvious application and something that I think most people would agree that they want. But do general people have sort of the technical understanding of any of this to really be able to, even if we made a rule that said everyone can do this, do we have the education level to actually take advantage of that?
Well, I think it is also, how do you make it easy and applicable? So this notion of giving somebody a mobile app where they can actually see where their data is being used and what kind of permissions are there is an important one. But I think it will require education, and it will require more consistency on the regulatory postures, which vary state to state and country to country. We just launched a Center for Blockchain and Data Transparency with Columbia University, specifically to look at these interdisciplinary and governance-related issues and how law and public policy and education are really going to be impacted by this notion of data. Our own studies say 66% of the people who are doing early adopter work in blockchain are doing it with the view that new business models will emerge. And seeing what those are and how they can help provide the incentives for participants, I think, is going to be very interesting.
Yeah. And just going back to that, you know, companies that are in this space now, it's going to be their fiduciary duty to be able to educate the consumer and really give them the information necessary, you know, like what we're doing in empowering consumers to take access of their health data. And for instance, you know, legislations that are out there now that are, you know, really helping to establish blockchain, you know, we can look at GDPR that was passed a couple of months ago. So it's really given the ownership, you know, to the individual to be able to own that data.
So we're already kind of going down that road.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just weigh it, because a lot of the concepts and themes you're hearing here, they cross sector. So, you know, she's working in a very different sector than I am, food, but the similarity, you talked about collaboration. In blockchain, we often talk about a couple of unique features. Obviously, people focus on the fact that the data is immutable. But we often say that it democratizes information. And that's why it incentivizes collaboration, because it's a decentralized and distributed database. In today's world, you have these centralized databases where in the food system, at least, you know, suppliers will get into a retailer system or a food service system. It's a centralized database, and it's only the retailers and the food service organizations that see the data and benefit. In a blockchain world, since everybody's putting their data in and they're permissioning who gets to see it, everybody gets smarter together. And so people are collaborating, they're incentivized to collaborate, as opposed to these siloed systems. In terms of privacy, the solution that we've been working on with IBM is you get in the system, it's your data, you own it, and you permission who you share it with. And so you alleviate that concern. And in our field, the regulators are very interested in it, whether it's the FDA, USDA, or CDC, because it also creates shared value. Everybody's going to benefit from this. Retailers will benefit because they'll run better supply chains, safer supply chains. Small farmers will benefit because when there's a romaine scare, it's not everybody's romaine product that's damaged, but what do we do? In an abundance of caution, we pull all romaine. And regulators will benefit because guess what? They're taking weeks doing paper traceback studies, and they potentially could get back to source in 2 seconds.
I mean, it sounds very utopian, but my experience with private companies are that they don't like, you know, people in other parts of the chain to know all that things, to know all that stuff, to, you know, especially the last 10 years, I mean, as the rise of the big tech companies built on data have shown the value of, you know, controlling large data sets and being able to see them in ways that other people can't, you know, building a lot of business value. I mean, how, like, are you really excited about giving access to other people?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that. There's always going to be trouble, and I think we're going to learn over time how do we collaborate and share data. But there's a couple of things that are going on here. Number one, pause to think about. Think about political scandals, not to get political here. Think about the financial crisis. Think about romaine outbreaks. Think about people concerned with the tech companies selling their data. What does that all result in? A lack of trust. Blockchain is a different version of a failure of a central institution. It's distributed and decentralized governance and a new form of trust. So I think people might become more comfortable because it isn't a single data owner. It's everybody collaborating together.
So corporations will see the value in making that cultural shift.
The other thing, consumers are demanding it, at least when it comes to food. You know, I've been doing this for a long time.
So it becomes a competitive advantage for consumers to be able to say that to them. Yeah.
And there are ways within the technology to safeguard some of that as well. You know, in the open source platform that we are using, Hyperledger Fabric, there's this notion of a channel and, you know, privacy. It's like, you know, a CB radio, if Walmart is on channel 7 and, you know, somebody else is on channel 12, you can't see all of that. You know the data is on chain, you have records of the number of transactions, but only that extended supply chain on channel 7 can see all of the data. So it addresses the sharing in addition to the confidentiality to create markets here. And I think that's a really important aspect. It comes back to the principle that your data is your data and that everybody should get some benefit.
Yeah. And to give an analogy, we really see it as a highway. With our blockchain, we've built an oracle to Hyperledger Fabric. But there are definitely controls in place within the technology, such as smart contracts, that you can use to really regulate who has access to the data and how you'd want to monetize it if we take a step further with that information.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add sort of public organizational perspective on this data traceability issue? From our point, data traceability is very, very attractive because we are buying so many goods and services with public money. Basically, it's a tax.
Right.
So we have to be very responsible for what we're buying. We don't want to buy something produced by child labor or slavery, anything. So to make sure we have to going back what we are buying. So data traceability is basically non-existent at the moment. If we buy one T-shirt, we really don't know how it's produced from the cotton farming to the thread cloth, all this process. There are so many players involved.
Yeah.
But blockchain possibly give us all the view from the beginning to the end. That will be very powerful for us to be responsible for sourcing.
Go ahead.
And that's a key part of that traceability and provenance in all of the use cases that we're really seeing, whether it's digital goods or physical goods. You know, more organic food was bought than produced last year in the United States. You know, so can you really?
How many of you eat organic food?
Right? Can you really be sure that that was the source? We're doing work with Everledger that is focused on providing diamond provenance and ensuring that it adheres to the Kimberley certificate, that these are ethically sourced diamonds and are not conflict mineral traded. We see it even in, we're working with True Tickets, trying to establish the provenance of ticket purchasing to reduce scalping and robo-buying for that, you know, key concert you wanted to go to. So, you know, whether it's core sustainable values, whether it is sourcing of funds, we're doing work with Global Citizen that is trying to ensure that the sources of the donations you may make in the event of a hurricane, for example, actually get to the intended recipients. And how can you trace that value chain to the end result? And Global Citizen was looking at how do you do that connected to aid.org to countries where they are trying to get the goods and services and make sure it gets where it's going.
If I could just round that out, because the common themes here, it's what we're really after is not traceability, but transparency, whether there was child labor, whether there were fake diamonds, whether the food was labeled as organic and it wasn't organic. When you can trace and track and monitor with data, then it's the equivalent of shining a light on each of these points in the food system. And what that drives is a new level of transparency that doesn't exist today in a lot of supply chains. And that transparency then leads to accountability, because people know that you're being watched. Anonymity in supply chains, is that a good thing? No. But there's a lot of anonymity in supply chains. Transparency is a good thing because it leads to accountability. And then I tend to be maybe a little bit optimistic that say that accountability will then lead to responsibility, because people will self-govern their behaviors knowing that they're operating in a transparent system.
I mean, so one of the big problems with blockchain is that the processing power to run these transactions is very high. That's how the system was built, to sort of, you know, force people to kind of ante up, use their computers, you know, for the original application of mining Bitcoin to kind of build that, you know, infrastructure. Whereas a lot of these transactions take more power than they would if you just use traditional computers that weren't on the blockchain. So for a lot of these applications, why couldn't we just, you know, this is something that exists right now, you know, find some sort of trusted third party, maybe an NGO that has no financial, you know, desire to make the food, you know, they're not on the farmer's side and they're not on Walmart's side, they're not even the consumer side. They're just sort of there and everyone kind of funds them, or there's some neutral way to fund them, and they're the ones who use an efficient, you know, database to go and track all these things. Why do we need to use blockchain?
So two important points in that. Number one, the original premise of Bitcoin was preserving anonymous financial transactions, and it used mining to solve the double-blind problem that you wouldn't have if you actually handed, you know, a $20 bill to someone to buy something. Many of the blockchain applications that are now in place rely on permissioning, not anonymous networks. Hyperledger Fabric happens to be one of those that don't use mining at all. So that whole notion, there is consensus, there is common posting of shared data, but the both ecological and energy consumption compute requirements of mining are eliminated, which makes it very efficient for even higher volume transactions. But when you have someone in the middle, by definition, and that's virtually all of our digital internet-based models today, whether you're connecting a rider and a driver or a bed and a guest or your social network, there is really all point-to-point communications with someone in the middle. And they are the ones that are setting the privacy and data sharing policy. They are the ones that are setting the price point. So if you now can truly create a distributed notion where people are trusting in that, you take out a step, which saves time and cost, and you are distributing both the workload as well as the benefit to the participants that are really engaged in the transaction. And that fundamental shift, I think, does address both trust and transparency, but opens up a whole new set of business models.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question, and then we're going to go to audience questions in about 3 minutes. So if you have anything, you can write something down and prepare for that. But so for us here in the audience, representing a diverse group of businesses and organizations, maybe struggling to keep up with this fast-moving technology, how much attention should we be paying? If I'm an executive of a company, should I be assigning someone to just track Bitcoin or blockchain technology in my space? Should I be investing in it myself, or can I wait and see how things progress down the road before really sequestering some of my time on this project?
So today, there are about 1,900 cryptocurrencies out there and 13,000 markets just on the cryptocurrency exchange kind of part of the story. And that's in the financial services space. Now you get into supply chain, digital rights, all of those. It is a very, very large and burgeoning field, and I think everyone needs to understand how it is going to affect them, because I think it will change business models, and I think it will change value chains in general for physical and digital goods. But I think the best way, and someone told me this, you can't get fit by reading about exercise. You have to actually get out there and do it. So the Fitbit folks that were here earlier, definitely agree with that statement. And I think it's just as important to get experience and join a network. You don't have to build one. You can participate. Hasera today just launched a multi-blockchain platform registry and marketplace. Patientory is on it. We have some of our offerings like Food Trust on it. Let people see, even in the permission space, what's out there and where you can engage, and just go join.
Let me tell you a little bit about my journey, because it kind of informs what I would recommend to others. Is when I first heard about blockchain and potentially linking it to food for food traceability, I was a major skeptic, like I think many of you in the audience are. There's a lot of hype.
Just a little bit.
Just very, very much. I've been pursuing what I had referred to the holy grail of food traceability for 30 years, never found it. And like Marie said, I started becoming convinced when I started to study how blockchain digitizes information differently, and more importantly, when we started working with it and conducting our own proof of concepts and pilots. And then I went from major skeptic to a blockchain believer. But I advise companies, because we get asked that a lot, should we just kind of wait and see what happens? There are some use cases out there today that would benefit right now. Food safety, traceability, and transparency can't wait. One outbreak is one too many. And so I encourage people, if you have a use case, do the analysis, and blockchain is the solution. Get started now. Don't wait.
Yeah, from my point of view, we're dealing with the failed states, or failing states, and then basically that is a root cause of many other things, poverty and the wars and everything. And blockchain is very, very unique technology in the sense that it's a technological solution to a political problem. It's a very rare case. So there are so many political problems, abuse of power, totalitarian, all under violation of the human rights. And that's because it's totally centralized. It's very difficult to break it down. For that, without that kind of centralized system, our life can be maintained or not. That's a big question. And then blockchain bring in the new perspective. Yes, you don't need a dictator to make life much easier. So that's a kind of a big breakthrough in the history of the political philosophy.
It's sort of with the petro in Venezuela, the new currency that, well, I don't know if it's quite exactly considered a cryptocurrency by most people, but you're right, there's interesting applications in that space.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have a lots of expectations of blockchain in future.
Yeah. No, so the market compares blockchain to the internet in 1995, but no, I think, and Gartner says we have at least like 10 more years until we really see true adoption of blockchain. But for me, I think it's much faster. As Marie said, we have over 1,900 cryptocurrencies in less than 5 years. So I think the companies who are ahead, who are really taking the initiative and who are going to survive the future are the ones that are actively doing R&D. They're testing different business use cases and different business models so that when true adoption is here, they're definitely going to be the ones at the forefront.
We have a couple minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Do we have any? Yeah, maybe this one right here.
Come here first. Sorry. I just wanted to ask the applications for ESG investing and for labor organizations to protect worker rights. If either of those types of organizations engaged in using blockchain, if you saw that as making a change happen faster.
There have been a lot of uses that get into labor, but more into who's doing what, more like, I will say again on the value chain, either on service level agreements of who was contributing to a given project or how many hours were worked, or for taxation and how this is extending across projects that may involve multiple jurisdictions or countries. But I think it's still early days in those areas.
Hello. So I was wondering, what do you all think are the biggest barriers to entry in using in adopting blockchain, and specifically related to the cost structure of the industries in which you work? For example, we know that in shipping, most of the cost is the last mile, right? So I wonder, is it mostly, like say for food, is it mostly end user adoption on the farms around the world, or is that will be the biggest cost, or is it going to be more on the top end?
Yeah, I'm happy to take first crack at that. Couple of them. What are some of the biggest challenges? One of the things we didn't hit on straight today is this concept that blockchain is every bit as much about the technology and how people work together, the social aspect. And we often say it's the soft stuff that's the hard stuff. We can figure out the blockchain and food traceability, but how do you get people to collaborate, share data, the conversations we've been having here? And so if I had to do one thing all over again, I would probably start on governance, the self-governance model, and how organizations are going to operate, permission, and share data. And so for those of you who want to tackle an ecosystem approach to blockchain, do both. Work on the technology and the self-governance and social issues. In terms of where are the barriers in the supply chain, I think every actor or actress in the supply chain benefits. There's going to be some barriers on the farm, that first mile with rural Wi-Fi, but IBM has developed some very simple apps to be able to collect information easy. Last mile might be a challenge as well, as last mile becomes a little bit more complicated. Last mile used to be, it goes from a distribution center to one of our stores, but now it goes from our stores to a person's home by bike, by a vehicle, by drone maybe in the future. And so there's some things we got to solve, but you don't have to solve as long as you start piecing together a large portion of how food flows from farm to table, eventually you can get the whole process, the continuum.
And I think the real opportunity is that network of networks. So as another example of that last mile, we're doing work with Maersk on supply chain digitization for delivery, all the way through, across ports, oceans, last mile on land. And if you now connect, a food trust solution with TradeLens on the global trade side, and to, capabilities that involve trade finance of those suppliers, and you actually see this network of networks connections that we're starting to build out here now, those barriers, which are all siloed today, you tend to operate in an industry in that that capability breaks down some of those barriers and gets at some of the interoperability.
And can I just tackle your economic question? Because you're talking about the cost of it. And here's the issue. If you think about foodborne disease, there's been studies that say a 1% reduction in foodborne disease saved the U.S. economy $700 million. If you look at food fraud, food waste, a third of all food going to waste. On balance, we think this would save the food system money as opposed to costing money. And we're strong believers in very low cost to no cost models of data entry. And when you start extracting value, it's because you're benefiting from something in the system. And so that's the type of vision that we have in terms of the financial models. But it has to be low, or to no cost to participate in many cases, or else the solutions won't scale.
All right, cool. For some reason, I really want a romaine salad now. Or maybe not. But yeah, thank you all for joining us, and thanks for participating and listening. And let's go right here.